we're going to have our first episode on this podcast called Let's Talk About Labor. This podcast is a collaboration between the University of Tennessee and Gap Connections and aims to help connect with farmers in Tennessee and other surrounding states, specifically to hear about their experiences with using various U.S. temporary foreign visa programs to address their labor needs. My name is Margarita Velandia. I'm a professor in the Department of Agricultural and Resource Economics. Jane?
My name is Jane Chadwell. I'm the executive director at Gap Connections, which is a nonprofit based here in Knoxville, Tennessee that has a focus on ag labor.
And I'm Amy Roachkis. I'm the training and resource coordinator with Gap Connections.
All right. So today, our invited speakers are George McDonald, owner of Catesa Farm, and Bart Gilmer, one of the owners of Falcon Ridge Farms. I'm very excited to have you both today in our inaugural podcast episode. And so we're going to talk about your experience in general with the H-2A program. For those of you who are not familiar with the H-2A visa program, the H-2A Temporary Agriculture Program, also known as the H-2A visa program, is a program that allows U.S. agricultural employers experiencing a shortage of domestic workers to fill seasonal or temporary jobs with foreign non-immigrant workers. Before we dive into the discussion about the H-2A program, George and Bart, why don't you tell us a little bit about your farm business, from the crops you raise, the number of employees you have, the types of employees you have on your operation, whether they are domestic, H-2A workers. So why don't you guys go ahead and introduce yourselves?
Go ahead,
George.
Bart.
All right. My name is Bart Gilmer. I'm from Falcon Ridge Farm over in West Tennessee. We're in Hardeman County, about 20 miles south of Jackson, about 50 miles east of Memphis. We are small fruits and vegetables, grow blackberries, blueberries, strawberries, and all your normal garden vegetables that you can grow in this region. And we've got about a 400 member CSA and attend 4 or 5 farmers markets each week during peak seasons. We sell to a few restaurants, but that's not a main avenue for us. During production months, we'll have 6 employees plus family members, and that is made up of domestic and migrant workers.
Okay. I'm George McDonald. Our farm is Catesa Farms. We're located about 50 miles northeast of Nashville. We have a very diversified farming operation. We have corn, soybeans, wheat, milo, strawberries, and watermelons. We have 10 full-time employees here at our operation. We normally get 10 H-2A workers, and also in addition to those extra 10, we'll have about 10 migrant workers who will work for us during that same period of time. Our family started farming here in our operation in 1927, so we're getting close to 100 years at our present location, and looking forward to another 100 more here in our operation.
Well, thank you, guys. We're going to go ahead and dive into our first question related to the H-2A program. I want you guys to walk us through the process from the time you plan on how many H-2A workers you want to bring for the next growing season to the time those workers get to your farm. Talk about whether you use firms or businesses to complete the whole certification process, what paperwork you need to prepare, even if you are using a third party, what kind of paperwork you actually have to do on your own, and general things you need to consider related to housing and transportation. Let's switch orders, and then let's start with George.
Okay. The biggest problem that we had, and most everyone has getting started with the H-2A program, is the fear of the unknown. That first jump in is what I think is the biggest fear that we all have. By getting over that, you was asking, do we do it ourselves? Do we use a labor agency? Me personally, I highly recommend a labor agency. Our plate's loaded here in this operation. at present and try and do all the documents that we have to do, we're happy to pay that labor agency to do the recruitment, to do the interviews, to file all the paperwork with the Department of Labor. So we let them handle that. We can't be a professional in every field that we do. We try to find the right people. And I think this is a prime example of that. So what paperwork we have to do, I'd like to emphasize to anybody starting out, have in mind of where these people are going to work, because on the petitions, you have to give the farms that they work on. We can't say, because we've tried this before and it didn't work, all the farms that are under the control or management of Catesa Farms. Wrong answer. They won't take that. You've got to specifically give farm locations and farm numbers of every farm. We farm in 6 different counties, so we have to walk a very tight rope to be sure we have all those farms and location. It's detail, 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 and that's the reason we use a labor agency.
Thank you, George. How about you, Bart? Walk us a little bit through the process.
Sure. I'll second what George said about using an agency to help you navigate through this. I wouldn't know where to begin without using the agency. We use AWMA out of Kentucky, Agricultural Workforce Management Association, and they do most of the heavy lifting as far as paperwork goes. And as far as a timeline of getting them here, we usually get our packet from AWMA in November, and that's going to be the paperwork that we need to fill out and get back to them so they can get everything filed with the Department of Labor and get the ball rolling. So we usually get that in November. Usually December when I complete it. It doesn't take a month to do, but it's just kind of when I get it done in December and get it back to AWMA, and they will get the ball rolling there. And then we have a housing inspection from the state of Tennessee, and that usually happens in January. Once we get that approved, that's kind of the last step. And then our first workers start arriving towards the end of February.
Excellent, George and Bart. It seems like you guys have to, again, it's a very useful source of labor and one that you guys had to use to overcome the labor challenges you had. But also seems like there are very many steps you need to follow, right? To bring these H-2A workers to your farm. So because of those many steps, go ahead, George.
From what Bart was saying and what I'm saying also, Margarita, I highly encourage people. We use H-2A Complete out of Mississippi. Get with somebody, talk to another farmer who's been using the program and run off their recommendation, because like Bart said, I do not want to dive off into this, all the unknowns that have to be done and all I's dotted and T's crossed without the help of people who do this on a daily basis.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Thank you, George. Now, again, since you said first looking for that guidance from other growers and agencies or firms that can help you through the whole process. Now, it still can be overwhelming, the process, even if you are using a third party. So tell us a little bit about the challenges you have faced using from the paperwork to all the things that you have to have ready to get these H-2A workers to your farm. So challenges that you have faced and strategies you have used to overcome those challenges.
Art, your turn.
Let's say, your greatest challenges, at least for us, was the first year or two. Your to-do list is much longer. Trying to get housing ready and inspected, make sure you're meeting all the guidelines before that first inspection you have from the state, and learning what all paperwork has to be done, what all you need to retain, and that type of thing. But it gets exponentially more simple each year that you do it. Once you complete all that paperwork one time, it's almost copy and paste when you get ready to go to next season. When I get ready to fill out this year's paperwork, I will pull out last year's paperwork and kind of work backwards from there. But like I said, just getting started is the hard part. And like George and I talked about, I really recommend getting somebody to help you. If you don't hire an agency, at least find a farmer or somebody that's using H-2A labor that you can talk to and consult with. But like I said, once you get through that first year or two, things seem to get much simpler.
As I was starting out in the beginning, I made a comment about how the fear of getting started, and Bart's reemphasizing that as well. And when you can copy and paste, but just like right now, this coming year, the wage rates have changed, the job descriptions have changed, and it make you be very careful to the detail. The devil is in the details on the H-2A program. I always tell people when I'm speaking to someone, I've never seen your house, maybe I've never been in your house, and for sure never seen the bed you sleep in, but I can nearly assure you that unless you're familiar with the H-2A program, your house probably won't meet H-2A specs. And it's just some crazy things, but it's got to meet those. Or as Bart says about the housing inspection, we had ours last week, and we'll start getting our first workers in about the middle of April. But you've got to be able to pay attention to the details, percentage of window space you got per person, the amount of square footage you've got per person, of bedroom space, amount of living space per person. And if you miss any of those marks, they will not grant you that application for those folks to come in until it's corrected.
I have a question for both of you. When we think about challenges and people getting into the H-2A program, I think of one thing that could be on somebody's mind is a language barrier. So how do you guys, kind of overcome a language barrier if there is one? Just some thoughts on that.
Well, you have to overcome that to communicate, and there's many different ways to communicate other than verbal. I know some people who just use a translate app, and I've had people ask me about, well, how do you get people to work? Well, these folks in general, when they get here, they've come to work and they want to work and they want to get the hours in to take back to their families. But we also have some bilingual people that work with us. You can also request on your visas or your petitions, you can request a bilingual person to come. So if you don't want to translate, you don't have anybody who can speak the language of whatever country they're coming from, you can always request one person to be bilingual to help translate too.
Yeah, pretty much the same here. We've used a little all the above. The apps are certainly getting better and easier to use. I use Google Translate as well as the Translate app that comes on the Apple iOS, and they do pretty good. Sometimes some of the more finer things, it doesn't translate just right, but we do have one bilingual worker here that lives here, and so that has been a huge asset to have that. And like George said, you can always request one bilingual worker out of your H-2A workers as well.
Excellent question, Jane. Amy, why don't you wrap us up with the last question here?
Sure. So thanks, Margarita. So when we think about wrapping up here, and we've had a really good discussion, what advice would you have for those who are just thinking about using the H-2A program as a source for labor? George, I'll let you start.
Help me fill in here, Amy. What do you mean by advice?
So if you were to talk to a new grower, someone that's never used the H-2A program as a source of labor, what advice would you have to a new person investigating the use of H-2A labor?
And maybe a part of that is, why did you go to the H-2A program? What led you to the point where you're like, hey, I'm going to take on this process with all these steps and do this?
Well, that was a pretty easy reason why we went that way. Everybody in my situation will be the same, I think, and that is the lack of labor, lack of dependable labor. When you've got 100 acres of watermelon sitting out in the field and you've got 20 people that are supposed to be there in the morning, and the next morning comes around and you look and there's 2 people showed up. That's a bad day. And what I like about this program is the folks have come, like I said earlier, have come to work. When you start petitioning for people, if you know people from the country they're coming from, I'd highly recommend the ones that's working with you to recommend those back in their home country to work, because they know their work ethic. Just because they come on H-2A work program does not mean they will be wonderful, outstanding workers. If they know these people from back home, a lot of times that really helps a whole lot in that process. But I think first and foremost, I would not tread on this water without a labor agency to work with. The paperwork is too cumbersome. It's too many layers of paperwork, and you mess up one layer, you've messed your season up. So a labor agency, and then knowing the workers that you're getting, would be great. And always remember, to anyone who has any workers coming on H-2A worker as H-2A program, you've always got that right to send them back if they're causing trouble or don't work, or you might live with them through that season. The next year you don't want them, get someone else. There's no need of having one bad apple in a basket.
That's great. Thanks, George. And I think you even answered the next question. Bart, what advice would you have to someone that's new to the H-2A program?
Yeah, just to echo what George said, find you an agency to help you as far as getting worker referrals. That's a great way. You know, the way that we did it the first year, we got 2 workers, and what we started doing from there when we wanted to add more workers is we would ask our current workers that we liked if there was anybody back home that they would recommend. And so that's kind of how we've built the team that we have now. And not only are you getting that recommendation that hopefully increases your chances of it being a good worker, somebody that you want to come back each year, but could help your worker chemistry as well. You know, if they all know each other from the same town or whatnot, they all get along better. And so yeah, that's a great thing to do as well.
And I think just one other thing I'll ask both of you is, as a new person looking at the H-2A program, are there any questions that a grower should be asking themselves? Like, you know, when it comes to the housing and the transportation, I think, George, as you mentioned in your statement, you know, the layers and layers of paperwork. As you know, as a new person evaluating whether you're going to jump into the H-2A program, what questions should you be asking yourself?
I think you know, the first thing is can you commit to that guaranteed work contract? And so when you get H-2A workers, you'll draw up a contract, and it guarantees that you're going to offer so many hours of work. And at the end of the season, you have to have complete or given them at least 3/4 of that work guarantee. And so if you're guaranteeing 40 hours a week, you at the very least have to average out to 30 hours a week at the end of the season. And so it's not something you can get into a couple of months and say, hey, I just want to quit and get out of this, because you are locked in for that season once you make that commitment. The other thing is, can I get my paperwork done and turned in 75 days prior to when I need those workers? And that's the number that our agency gives us. It may vary a little bit from agency to agency, but ours needs to be in and completed 75 days before the first day of that contract. And the last thing I would ask myself is, can I get my housing completed and inspected in time? And I can't remember what the how many days prior to the contract start that's got to be done, but it's not 75, because I know mine is usually in January, and our workers get here towards the end of February. And so I'm thinking 30-45 days prior is probably what's required.
I was just looking over my shoulder right there, and I think it's 30 or 45 days, because like I said, ours was just inspected this last week. So that's going to be hitting Bart about where you're talking about.
George, what questions, if you were new to the program, should you be asking yourself?
Where am I going to house them?
Okay.
To me, that's one of the top priorities right there. You've got to have a house or bunkhouse or some type of housing that will meet H-2A compliance. Bart was talking about the guaranteed hours. Some people struggle with that. We have no issues with that because we got lots of work for them to do here. You need to be very specific on your petitions of what you want, expect them to work. And what I mean by that is if you had in there that they were going to be picking tomatoes and you got a labor inspection and they were driving a tractor on a full-time basis, not just drive it to drop tobacco sticks or drop tomato sticks, but if there's working fields, you've kind of got taboo there because you're asking them to do labor that you did not specify. So once again, the devil's in the details on petitions. And just like Bart and myself, don't go it alone. And we've been doing this for 7 or 8 years now. And I would not even think about going alone with it without a labor agency. And I'm very familiar with the one Bart uses. A lot of folks around here use that. The folks we're using, the reason we went with those folks is because they got a lot of experience in the produce industry.
And do they also help you? I know you talked about the changes in wage rates and also the recent changes in job descriptions and requirements. Are they also letting you know about law changes and requirement changes? So that also kind of takes that off your plate of constantly seeing what's the DOL coming out with?
Yes, they take that AW, whatever it's called, Bart. They take that load off from me. He's got to look at his paper and see too. But there you go. I am right there.
Get a newsletter once a month, and that's got all those updates. I got the same one too. Yeah. But yeah, that's another huge advantage to using the agency is keeping up with the ever-changing rules and regulations because they do keep us up to date on that, give us, as much notice as they can about wage rate changes and all that kind of stuff. And they'll inform us on, if they're lobbying for some kind of change, they keep us up to date on that. And so it's just an invaluable resource.
And Amy, one other thing that we haven't talked about, I don't think it's in Margarita's sheets, is on paying these folks about how do you write the checks and keep up with that. We pay our agency a small percentage to write those checks and do all the documented paperwork with them. It's the cheapest 3%, 4%, whatever it is that we could spend, because what we get into is if you're working, let's just say in our operation, we've got 10 workers, 7 of them are still working because the other 3 are fast and they finish their task that was assigned to them on that Saturday. And the 7 gets 2 more hours than the other 3 did. You've got to have that in file, why you didn't offer that same work to the others or what was the reason why. Or if you have one sick that day, why that was not documented. They didn't show up for work that day. So like we keep saying, the devil's in the details on all this stuff.
And George, you make an excellent point. And I think we could do a whole podcast on helping everyone understand what hours offered and hours paid are and how you figure that. And you're right. The devil's in the details of making sure that you have that documentation in place.
Exactly.
They're just going to have to stay tuned, Amy. They're going to have to keep watching.
All right, guys. So we're almost to the end of our podcast. I really want to thank you, Bart and George, for taking the time to talk to us. And in our next episode, we'll talk about something fun, which is housing requirements. Thank you, guys. See you in the next episode.